the first thing that comes to mind is the gut. But the more we look into it, we know that by giving probiotics, you can impact immune health. You can impact the cognitive health. And there's how many more organs that we could be, or systems that we could
Yeah.
be impacting through potential uses of probiotics.
Welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Dennis Jewell, and here is Dr. Guevara. We are going to talk about some pretty exciting information today about how we might influence the lives of pets through probiotics, prebiotics, postbiotics, this area of understanding of feeding the whole organism, if you will, including what's growing within it. So I'm just going to ask Dr. Guevara to tell me a little bit about your background and how you got to be where you are today. Let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dennis, I'm a veterinarian by formation, so I always liked animals my whole life, and in particular pets. So, went to vet school, and after vet school, I worked for a few years with a pet food company in Venezuela, which is where I'm originally from. And after a while, I said, okay, I'm working with pet nutrition. I want to know more about it, and I went back to school. I went to graduate school at the University of Illinois with Dr. George Fahey, and I got my master and PhD in companion animal nutrition at Illinois.
Yes.
While I was there, I did research looking at some ingredients, in particular some carbohydrates, and how they would impact digestion and other different factors in dogs and cats. And with that also came how those were impacting the microbiome. So not only um, using them as an ingredient, but how they were impacting fermentation and the microbiome. After that, I went to Procter and Gamble, and I was a clinical scientist there, so doing clinical research for a few years. And over there, I also was looking at the impact of different ingredients, different diet profiles on gut health, on the microbiome, and even some a little bit of I dived a little bit into metabolomics at the time. After that, I went and had some different roles at Mars Pet Care, and in last again also in the pet nutrition aspect. In last year, I moved more into this world of probiotics or biosolutions when I joined Kristen Hansen, which recently merged with another company, and just since last month it's called Novonesis. So that's where I am now, doing some research on the impact of probiotics in pets.
84 million times a day, pets eat meals with ingredients from Trow Nutrition. We bring together the science of ingredients, nutrition, and blending to unleash possibilities for pet food brands. Premixes are just the start. Turn to Trow for higher inclusion ingredients too, like proteins and carbohydrates, and highly sensitive ingredients like probiotics. With our palatants and base blends, you can feel confident about what comes in our bags and goes in yours. Learn more at TrowNutritionPets.com.
Well, that's pretty exciting. Thanks for sharing, kind of your path to get to where you are today. You have the opportunity, I think, to look at that pet right where the consumer is looking at it. We're saying, look, this is my really valued pet, and I want to maximize, optimize their life and the life with us. So tell me what you might be looking at for like, how do I tell? I start out and I'm interested in optimizing pets. What do you do to say this is a good thing, and what challenges might there be in looking at that in your space?
Sure, and I think that's evolved a little bit during time. So going a little bit with what it was my formation. Initially, when we would look at fibers, we were looking at fibers just as an ingredient that would help just move the content in the gut, right? So it would be just to help move stuff. And as our understanding of fibers and different carbohydrates evolve, we're looking at their impact on the health of the host of the animals, and as there were these carbohydrates, these fibers were being fermented by the microbiota in the gut, and that's how we came with the term prebiotic. And back in the 80s, 90s, we're looking at the impact of some of these fibers on health in these animals. When initially, as you know, we're very limited into understanding who was there, what species of microbes were in that microbiota, because everything was based about culturing, and the big majority of the microbes cannot be cultured with all our methods.
They die in culture, right?
So, but that also started evolving as we develop all these molecular techniques, and when we move into looking at microbes specifically, then there's that definition of probiotic, that it's those microorganisms that when are fed to an animal, they can exert a beneficial effect. So just more or less, that's a definition. And we're looking then into these microbes and how they were impacting the health of these animals. And then as a next step was some of these microbes are producing some metabolites. And when we looked at the definition of postbiotics, which has evolved also during the years, the most current definition talks about inanimate microbes and or their metabolites. So it's a preparation of them together that it's given to an animal to have a beneficial effect. So all of these things can as we were discussing, have an effect on our pets, and improve their well-being.
No, that sounds really interesting. Let's walk through the history a little bit because I think it might be interesting for those listening to the podcast. When I first started in the 1970s, but it was a long time ago, and we were looking at nutrients that fed the lower gut, and really sort of all we knew was that, okay, we're getting more butyrate out, and that seemed good. We didn't have any idea what other things were coming out. We didn't really know what microbes were there at all. Others tried to culture them. We didn't even try because that was so complex, and you knew that most of them were dying. So the windows opened up really with the microbiology that you're describing, where you can you not only know the species, but even sometimes the strains of the species. And when we first started, it was sort of like, well, if we could be positive on bifidobacteria, then that would be great. We would know there was something good there because we liked bifidobacteria. It's really gotten much greater than that now, isn't it? We have this really wild milieu of a ecosystem
Yeah.
that's there. And can you tell me a little bit about the measurement devices? How do we know even what's in there?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, initially we were looking at some of those species, and trying to say, well, bifidobacteria, they tend to be good. So if there are more of these, that's a good thing, right? So, and as these molecular techniques improve, we're able to look at the whole composition of that microbiota, looking at that microbiota as a whole organism inside or and around us in our bodies, right? So it's that whole population of microbes that are there. And when as molecular techniques advance and we're able to sequence that whole thing, that we're looking not only at those microbes and who was there, but also at the whole genome. And when looking at that genome, you could also understand that their functions, and not only who was there, but what they were doing, and how those things, the populations and their skills, that those abilities were changing with different interventions or different environmental influences in pets.
So when you're looking at that whole ecosystem, the genome-wide thing, which is the capacity that has of metabolism and really life as a community, how do No. How do you know which is important? Like, couldn't you maybe have a small species that was really, small in number,
Yep.
but yet really important because it did the one thing everything else needed? Or is it more like, look, if we look at the top 10, we sort of know what's going on, it's good enough?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things here, Dennis, and we have to keep in mind that when we're doing these interventions, yes, we're looking at populations of microbes and their genomes, but at the end of the day, we also have to understand what their impact is on the animal. So, because by definition, you have to have with both prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics, you have to exert a beneficial effect. So you need to keep in mind also the host and how you're going to measure in the host that beneficial effect. So that's
Okay.
on one hand. On the other hand, as you mentioned, we're looking at these very complex ecosystems, and you're going to hear terms like diversity. So the microbiome in itself can have diversity within a single host, that you're going to have multiple species within that host, but also how's that diversity when compared to other animals. So there are multiple measurements you can look at when looking at this microbiome information that can help you assess. And again, alpha diversity, beta diversity, those are terms that you're going to see thrown around, but those are could be a good measurement of if a microbiome might be healthy or not. Again, keep in mind that at the end of the day, what we want is a host that is healthy.
Oh, that makes sense because really, of course, what the person who has the pet in their home, that best benefit is if the pet's helped. But I think just the deeper dive, we're research scientists. I've published about those diversity measurements,
Mhm.
and I keep wondering, if I have increased diversity because I'm adding heliobacter, I don't like it. That's a bad thing. But in general, you sort of feel like if there's that more robust,
Yes.
the Texas A&M group seems to really have some handle on what those diversity measures kind of optimize at? What do you feel about it?
Yeah. So when you have some of these measurements, again, when you're looking at diversity, there is also a couple of different ways that you can look at diversity, right? So you might have a very large number of species, but some of them are going to be, when you look at numbers or the richness of some of those species, they're going to be more prevalent. And
Yeah.
that might not be the best, even though you might have, let's just throw a number, 100 species, right? And out of that 100, you have one that it's the most prevalent. The other 99 are just small amounts. That might not be necessarily the best. And then there's that evenness of, you have a diversity of species, but they're evenly represented in terms of numbers. So those are also two things that you have to look at when we were talking diversity. It's that richness and that evenness of the population.
No, thank you. That helps a bit. So again, we're trying to get indicators. We can measure things in the lab. It's completely non-invasive. It's completely just fecal
Yeah.
samples, and we're trying to say, is our intervention a success? So that's certainly one way. What might you look at in the pet itself? What might be markers of a successful intervention in the space we're talking?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're looking sometimes at these measurements of the microbiome, those are tied when we say that generally the diverse populations are better, is because that is being tied with something in the animal. And as you mentioned, in the companion animal world, we're very restricted on what we can do in terms of research. Internally in our company, we have a welfare policy that we do only non-invasive research, and that means, of course, fecal collection and in sometimes some blood collections. But
Mhm.
that is probably as far as we can go. And part of the challenge is that limit on what we can do. But the other challenge is that with companion animals, you're dealing with in general with animals that are healthy. They're living in a
Yes.
very clean environment with very good attention. When you compare that to livestock that might be facing more challenges, that paints a completely different uh, type of framework that you have. So with companion animals that are healthy, like what can you measure to understand if your intervention is making a difference? And that is a challenge that I lead daily as a researcher in the world of probiotics. And in particular, what we have been doing is when you think about the impact of probiotics, you also, and in general of interventions to impact microbiome, you're thinking about keeping that animal healthy. And in some cases, there are some known stressors, for example, in puppies transitions, like when you bring a puppy home,
Yeah.
or in the case of service dogs, when these puppies are brought into training, those are stressors, or a trip. Those are stressors that might bring some changes and might have, for example, an impact on gut health. And you may have a transition diarrhea, or just soft stools, not call even diarrhea, but soft stools. And what is being shown by research is that with some interventions like probiotics, for example, the duration of those soft stools, and even the incidence of those soft stools gets reduced with some of these probiotics interventions. So those are some of the things that you can look at. And borrowing a term from sometime from livestock is just supporting that normal health status of these animals, just keeping them robust, resilient to stressors, to environmental factors that could impact their health.
I think that's pretty interesting. I think it's fairly common. I know, as you know, you talk to veterinarians who are seeing pets with upset. Maybe they ate something, they had a stressor, now they're presenting with diarrhea. This is often a healthy pet,
Yep.
but they have that transitional problem you're talking about. It is fascinating, isn't it? Because we deal with a population that often people care very much about. They have good veterinary care. They're providing nutrition that's certainly meeting all the requirements. But you're talking about something that's above requirements. I think something that maybe to meet all the requirements is you have long life, you have reproductive capacity, you have measurements of health,
Hmm.
but they wouldn't include what you're talking. So this is an area that's would you say you said like enhanced health or natural optimized health? I think it's where really the market is and people are, because they want the best.
Absolutely. And as we've kept pets longer and longer with us, with improvements in nutrition and health, these pets are living longer. And but we not only want long life of our pets with us, but they're living a good life. So their quality of life is good. So their
Yeah,
well being in general. So, and sometimes with these interventions is when you can go beyond what it's that minimal nutrition that is going to provide everything that they need, but it's what beyond that to provide welfare. So there are interventions of, for example, with probiotics, that in some cases they've been proven not only to impact gut health but impact immunity, for example, and make puppies respond better to vaccines, or make senior animals maintain their immune system better and healthy during their whole life. And even in some other species like humans, or livestock species, and we're kind of seeing some of that in dogs and cats as well, is the impact of probiotics on just mental well-being. And that of course it's through that whole complexity of having and we briefly chatted about this, how we're looking only at things in the gut, but how that gut, for example, contains the largest immune organ in the body, which is the gut associated lymph tissue. And how sometimes through that immunity, and even through the gut brain axis, how these components in the food, these components of the microbiota, can be impacting well beyond the gut, that well-being of dogs and cats.
so it's fascinating, isn't it? Because again, I always smile when I started. We had such a limited view based on what we could measure, what we could grow in culture, and based on the limitations of we perhaps weren't even looking at the right things. So that was, it's growth. That's advancement in science. But you're talking about these really intricate interactions between gut microbiota, which is living in this space separated by the GI tissue, really influencing through the gut brain connection and then the gut immune connection, which is right tight. Obviously, as you said, that gut associated lymphoid tissue is monitoring in really significant ways what's going on, and even influencing, right, that it's responding back. There's a communication set
Crosstalk,
up.
yeah.
Yeah, that crosstalk fascinates me to think, that the microbes in some way are interacting with the host and the host is interacting with them, and probiotics influences that. Is that what I'm understanding today?
Yes, and when we're thinking about probiotics, Dennis, again, keeping in mind, I want to go a little bit through the definition. It's these live microbes that are given to a host in adequate amounts, and then they have a health benefit, right? So when we're giving these microbes, keep in mind a couple of things. We might be increasing populations of microbes that are naturally in the microbiota in that animal, but we can also be bringing microbes from a different environment into the gut environment that still have a very good impact on health. So that's how sometimes probiotics can be exerting that effect. Is you have to think about, I would say, mainly three buckets, which is the interaction of that microbe that you're adding directly with the food, and sometimes microbes can secrete enzymes that help break down components. The interaction of that probiotic with other microbes, and that could be antagonism, or it could be competitive exclusion, or even impact the whole microbiome. And then the interaction of that probiotic directly with the host, and that's where that probiotic can be uh, impacting either the gut barrier or the immune system. And it's mainly through those three mechanisms how these probiotics are going to be exerting that beneficial effect.
Wow, each one of those is worth some discussion, I think. Let's start with that direct interaction. How does a microbe directly interact, rather than, I always think of, it's making something, it's excluding something, and those are interaction. But how does the gut interact directly with the microbiota?
Absolutely. So the microbe, when we have a microbe, a probiotic, or in general the microbiota, they're going to be in very close contact with the gut lining. And what that does is you have a couple of things. You're going to have the immune system that is going to be constantly probing and monitoring. And we have evolved with our microbiomes. So when we think about it, sometimes we're surprised of that crosstalk and that interaction. But at the same time, when you think from an evolution perspective, we evolved with them. So we're pretty much we can be seen as a single organism. So when the immune system is interacting with specific microbes, they can help modulate that immune response. And we know that an immune response is needed, but an excessive response can be also harmful. So sometimes these microbes, when they interact with specific immune cells, they can help modulate that response, decrease the amount of certain cytokines, and increase the amount of certain cytokines, and can help modulate that response just by stimulating the right immune cells. Um,
That's fascinating. So the interaction with the microbes is responding with the immune system to send out signals to other immune players, or the host in general. What about the other talk? Do you think, what's going on with those modifiers maybe coming, into the secretion in the gut? I'm very curious in this. What's the host doing in the other direction to sort of modify the microbiota, or communicate again with that ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we mentioned, there's a crosstalk, and there is a whole bunch of metabolites that these microbes are secreting right there in contact with the gut lining that help sometimes, for example, with that how that epithelium is maintained. And we've heard the term gut barrier or leaky gut that's been in the media a lot. And some of those substances are created by microbes, and just that direct interaction of the microbes with some of those gut cells can help that those gut cells are more tightly together, or sometimes they can come apart. So when we have that tight junction being closer together, that is, of course, from a health perspective, more desirable, because you have those
Yes.
things that are going to be able to cross through that barrier in the gut.
You kind of want it to go through the barrier, not break. I mean, be held by the barrier, not break it apart, right?
And in general, harmful microbes have that ability of secret metabolites that are going to try to break that apart. So
Yeah.
it's that balance of these good microbes helping maintain that tight junction, and then some of the bad microbes trying to get through that junction.
It almost, I don't know. Sometimes I think of it as a medieval battle. You know, you've got the walls. You really like to keep those walls intact, and somebody's really trying to punch a hole through them to get to the goodies inside.
No, no, no. Like absolutely, that is a constant struggle and balance in the gut, as we were discussing.
Yes. I wonder about the actual microbes. I know I was having a conversation with someone on the human side a couple weeks ago, and she
Hmm.
was saying, you know, she had taken a lot of human probiotic products, and they were just dead.
Yeah,
So they didn't have the capacity. They may still have had some value, right? I mean, there may be something there, but not the value they wanted. They wanted this interaction we're talking about.
absolutely.
How do you maintain that viability of these really, you know, kind of sensitive organisms all the way to the pet?
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. One thing is, again, going back to definition, by definition, probiotics need to be alive to exert that benefit, and we have to think that that microbe need to be alive as an ingredient, has to survive the processing, and then also has to be alive during the whole shelf life of the pet product that you're going to be,
Yeah,
call it
yeah,
food or a treat. So when it gets to the animal, it's ingested, it survives the transit in the GI system, and it's alive to exert the benefit. So it's a whole chain. So there are a few different things, and of course there's a difference how some species might be more hardy or more resistant than other species. In general, lactic acid bacteria, because of their biology, they tend to be more sensitive to environmental factors, call it heat, moisture, and they can die more easily. So you're going to generally have a harder time to maintaining lactic acid bacteria alive. The way you do that is by handling the amount of water in that they have available to you. So having a lower water activity in the product, and also restricting the temperatures at which they are exposed. So those, there are a multitude of factors that impact viability, but if you have to focus on the two largest ones, those would be the two largest ones. But still, having a lactic acid bacteria survive, being on a product for a long time and on shelf, it can be challenging. And that's when you see a lot of this, and there's research published. It's not new. It was done about 20 years ago in Canada, where they took pet products and that were making probiotic claims, and they found that a lot of them didn't have live microbes in them. There is no, I haven't seen published recent data. We have some internal data that shows that still that's the case for some products, that yes, probiotics are not alive, so you cannot call them probiotics. Now there are some other species that can form spores, which in
yes.
general are bacillus, spore forming bacillus, that they're very hardy to environmental conditions, and those can be better options when you're adding to a pet product that's going to stay on shelf for a long time. And if you play a little bit with your species and also with the conditions of the product, that's when you can maintain that probiotic alive. And a very specific example, of course, the largest pet product that is sold is dry dog food, right? Or cat food, but like dry food
Yes.
in general, it's the
Yeah.
largest. And the only way that you can achieve significant amounts of live probiotics in them, is that you have to apply them after your extrusion, your kill step. I mean, your kill step is there. It's called a kill step for a reason. It's gonna kill all the microbes or most of the microbes in there.
And I like to tell people, we invented fire for a reason. That's a good thing. You like everything dead for a while. Now we're going to add back the goodies, right?
Yes. And so usually you do that post extrusion, and there are ways you can apply it post extrusion either directly as a coating or through mixing it with some of the palatants or fat and then add it, coat it post extrusion. So that would be my recommendation for dry food. For of course for wet food, there is at this point no solution to that probiotics, and for treat supplement, sorry, it's going to be very depending on the process. So my recommendation would be just partner with your supplier so you can find the best way to apply it in your specific process, in your specific matrix.
So that if you were like some cats, they really want to eat canned food. My pets, some we were trained on dry. They really want dry. It's this life. But if you had that canned food, then you'd probably be adding it right at the site, this probiotic right at the site of consumption, and because the canned is more or less, it's not sterile in a absolutely clinical sense, but it's sterilized. You go through this kill step and nothing gets added after that. So the probiotic is not really going to survive that. What do
Yeah.
you think? We talked a little bit, but it still fascinates me. We come in to this ecosystem with, I don't know, what you tell me, please. You'll be the expert and are the expert. How many species are present in a normal gut ecosystem?
Yeah. So in and that is it's a great question with probably not a very good answer, Dennis, but it's highly variable. That would be my response. So you can have from a few dozens to hundreds of species, and that's going to depend a lot on the population of dogs or cats you're sampling. As we were mentioning diversity at the beginning, the larger the diversity is considered that it's correlated with a healthier parameters. But again, depending on diet, depending on the environment, depending on a lot of environmental factors, that can go from again a few dozens to a few hundred.
Well, tell me about this richness of diversity and evenness of diversity, kind of two markers we might track as we look to try to
Mhm.
optimize health. What does that mean from a microbiota?
So when looking at some of these parameters, again, that is going to be very dependent on the environment. And when we say environment, that means, of course, diet and not only the environmental conditions, but that can also be impacted by things like breed or breed size. So depending on the breed size, you might have differences in some of these parameters. I think the key then is to understand what's the relationship of these parameters with health benefits in specific populations. So instead of
Okay.
just getting caught on some, just looking at some of these numbers, as I said, in general, more diversity with good richness and good evenness, that's going to be related to good health.
Okay. Well, that sounds, yeah, it kind of makes sense to me. It sounds quite straight up. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about this. We're setting ourselves up for a difficult thing, right? We've got these healthy pets. We want to optimize them, so we almost need to look for a stressor. We of course we're trying to reduce stressors, but normal stressors happen. But then, is there any downside? I mean, could you have a problem with probiotics, or maybe not the ones you work with, but people out there? What, sort of everything comes with a cost usually, and what might be some of that? Yeah, watch for this kind of answer.
So I would say a key thing to giving our pets or even taking ourselves a microbe species is we need to make sure that it's safe, of course. So the process of getting a probiotic on the market should involve a very strong safety assessment, and that assessment can come in the form or shape of first doing a whole genome sequencing to understand what genes are present in that probiotic to make sure that it's not going to be toxinogenic, that it's not going to carry antimicrobial resistance genes, and how stable that genome is. If you have a microbe or a strain that it's going to be highly variable, their genome, that they can take genes from other microbes, or they can have mutations that can bring that potential lack of safety for that microbe, for that strain. So that's one thing when looking just at the genome, but also that safety assessment should include also that phenotypical expression if these microbes are actually expressing some of these genes. So
Yes.
in general, you want to have a very strong safety assessment, and EFSA in Europe has a very strong set of parameters that are necessary to do these safety assessments. And uh, again, I can only speak for what I've seen internally in our company, and the safety assessment that we do on probiotics is very strong, very in depth, both from the genome perspective, but also the phenotype or expression of these genes. Now, that would be one thing. It's just ensuring that safety of a probiotic. In general, when we're giving probiotics, we're giving in relation to the whole number of microbes that are in the gut. We're giving small amounts. It's just that those small amounts can have a good effect. You're in general, when we're talking probiotics, you're talking in the sense of millions to up to billions if we're talking supplements. But so we're talking 10 to the 6 to 10 to the ninth. But we know that in the gut we're talking numbers of 10 to the 12, roughly 10 to 11th, 10 to the 13th, depending. So it's just a little bit of a drop in a bucket. So just like as you see beneficial effects, potentially you could have harmful effects. However, it's I haven't seen very widely reported harmful effects unless it is again a microbe that in itself or a strain that in itself was not safe to begin with and has this potential to do harm.
Well, let me just touch on that a little bit because I just, I would want the reputable supplier like you're speaking of. And I know we, as biologists, we always, sort of try and live by that first do no harm.
Yeah.
Lots of things we might like to do, but you think, oh, maybe not for the population, a best thing. But what's the regulatory environment? Is that regulated by the government, or should the consumer be pretty knowledgeable because it's the kind of open field and lots of opportunity out there to choose good or bad?
Yeah, so the by regulation, the microbes should be safe. So that is part of one of the conditions that is set forth, for example, by regulations in the U.S. Now, the level of scrutiny of that safety assessment varies depending on the country, but in general, you any ingredient that comes into pet food, that's what we're talking today, needs to be safe for the intended species, for the dog or for the cat. And this is the responsibility of the company to do that safety assessment and make sure that what they're selling is safe.
Yes, and I know these companies, we all have our background. The ones I've worked with too were
Yeah.
tremendously concerned about safety because they cared about pets, but also to sort of lean back, like they cared about their business. And there's no faster way out of a business than, oh, we're harming pets. That's really not good. So that I think as a whole, you using those boy, I can't even say it, those.
Reparable.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Those types of ingredient chains are really what's going to assure assurance, because it is kind of hard to test it back in, right? You need the procedures, and then you do the quality assurance, yes, but that quality assurance lives on the quality of the whole procedures. So
And for pet food companies, I've been on the side of the pet food companies, and now I'm on the side of a supplier of a pet food company. There needs to be that partnership so we can all maintain that quality and safety in the pet food industry. So as a pet food manufacturer, you need to partner with your supplier, and then this supplier needs to be able to provide you with all the data that you need to make sure that the food that you're putting out is safe, it's efficacious. If you're having a food with a probiotic, then that you're actually maintaining that probiotic alive during the whole shelf life. So and
Yes.
that can only be done if you have a really close partnership with your supplier. So pet food company and supplier ingredient companies need to be working together towards that common goal.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's step back a little bit and just do the kind of industry. Is this something you see going on for a long time? Is there value yet for a research scientist like yourself, or what if someone's thinking about getting into this industry? Is there value you could see, on the horizon that looks, yeah, it's good for research there? What's your feeling as you look out?
Absolutely, and so there, I would say I'm gonna split my answer in two, right? So there's, as a scientist, only looking at the science, there's so much untapped potential of the things or the systems that and health that benefit that we can get to. So that's purely as looking at the science side. From the industry side, the other aspect is what's the potential of this to keep going. And when you look at probiotics, we have some consumer research data that we, for example, in the US, uh, about a quarter of people is using probiotics in their pets, in some sort of fashion, either in the food or supplements or treats. But we see other countries, in Asia, for example, where there's a very high awareness of the benefits of probiotics. That number increases to about 70% of the pet parents or pet owners are giving a probiotic to their pets. So that's giving you, like, if you're at 25 and there's a potential to get to 70, think of, like, still how much the industry can do regarding probiotics,
Yes.
with just raising awareness. And I would say out of the three or four biotics, depending on how you count them, prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics, at this point, there's, of course, from a consumer perspective, there's way more awareness of probiotics compared to pre and postbiotics. No, I'm not talking that one is better than the other one, but
Yeah.
in terms of, if you're only looking at from a consumer perspective, you want to put out products that are relevant for the consumers. The awareness on probiotics, it's way higher compared to the other two. So that means that, of course, we need to do a better job probably at educating about the benefits of pre and postbiotics, but also means that we can also leverage that awareness of probiotics to have a positive impact on the health of pets through probiotics.
That's something I don't think we touched on in this conversation. We've had a couple conversations, but that positive impact can really be things like the effect of cognitive function, effect of immune function. I've published effect of organ function, as some of those postbiotics are really nasty as far as what the kidney has to deal with. And so that positive function is, at least as we might develop it over the time, it's easy for that person with a pet in their home to say, I really want quality stools. I really
Yeah,
don't want diarrhea. But for long-term optimum health, things like cognitive function, things like organ function, immune function, those are big things.
absolutely. And as we evolve in science and we develop better tools and we identify newer strains, then that's going to take us to look at the impact of some of these strains or probiotics into different organs. As you
Yeah.
mentioned, like, the initial thought when we think about probiotics is gut, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind is the gut. But the more we look into it, we know that by giving probiotics, you can impact immune health, you can impact the cognitive health, and there's how many more organs that we could be, or systems that we could
Yeah.
be impacting, through potential uses of probiotics. So and the list keeps growing. Oral health, in the case of humans, for example, probiotics given orally, for women, that can impact urinary health. So again, the list keeps growing and growing as we look at it.
Well, that's fascinating. I hadn't really thought about oral health, but the reality is I know that oral microbiota has a tremendous influence on sort of whole body health, and kind of makes sense. There's a really close connection there. But yeah, so that's an exciting area. So lots of opportunity for yourself in the field or for others that might be interested in it.
It's time for our famous three. ADM, Unlocking Nature, Enriching Life. As a global leader in pet nutrition, ADM is always looking at what's next, taking a forward-looking view of the industry landscape and a comprehensive approach to developing innovative, science-backed foods, treats, and supplements so owners can take a proactive approach to their pet's wellness.
And I'd like to pick your brain a little bit. I
Sure.
want to know, as you look at a team, and as you look at a team, maybe you'd like to form or you'd like to be on. What are the characteristics of those individuals that you say, yes, that's someone that I would like to be there with? What would you look at?
So Dennis, I'm a firm believer of diversity in teams, and generally I look at people that has a completely different perspective than I do. Um, Sometimes it can be hard to work. I mean, you tend to gravitate to people that are similar to you, but
Yes.
also that having people that are different from you and have different experiences, different ways of thinking, it helps you. It helps you increase the creativity of the team. So I would say I look for people that are curious, and they're open to not set on their ways, but open to try different things. That would be in general when I'm thinking about soft skills, good communication skills. But communication not necessarily mean being an extrovert or like just being a talker. So again, it's a complexity of having at the same time having the right background when we're coming to some of these themes.
Yeah, so it is fascinating, isn't it? And one of the great joys of being in a team is watching how that team is producing at a level that just adding everyone's talents together. The
Yeah,
team does more than that sum of the talents, and that's really so much fun. I understand that. So well, I've been excited to talk to you a little bit about this area. We if you were to summarize it, what would you say? You've been here a long time, in maybe a quick summary of it, or even if someone wanted to know more about this, where would you send them to read or hear more about probiotics and their value in pet food science?
absolutely. So I would say the usually when I get this question, my first thought is about ISAP. That is a non-biased organization that is scientifically based. That's going to look not only about probiotics, but it also looks at prebiotics, postbiotics, symbiotics. So in general, the biotics world, I would say ISAP is they have really good infographics. They have put out good position papers with definition of some of these terms. So I would say that would be my reference. It's
And let's dive that a little bit. So it's ISAPP. This is an
correct.
organization. And can you find it? If you do an internet search for ISAPP, is that what comes up? I've not done it.
Yeah, it stands for International Scientific Association of Probiotics and Prebiotics. So
Okay.
again, they have that's in their name, but they also have they were the ones putting out the definition, for example, for postbiotics. So
Yes.
it's
Excellent.
what I like about them is that they're not only scientifically based, but also that they put out contents both for scientists but also for general public. So they have really good infographics that are very accurate but very easy to understand.
Excellent. Well, that's a good source. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to do more like a deep dive on probiotics, we have there are a series of webinars that you can find on the internet. Particularly, our company is in the last year or so we've had a few webinars on probiotics, on stability of probiotics, mechanism of action. So, and it goes all the way from not only pet but other species. So you can go into still you can go into the Christian Hansen website. It has not changed name still, even if we had the merger. And there is a webinar platform that you can find some webinars with specific topics that it would be more in depth for some of those topics.
Well, that sounds great, and I'm sure people will be interested in that, and perhaps at a future date sometime down the road, we'll get a deeper dive into what we could chat about each one of those, right? It would be a nice podcast about each one of those topics, and I would be interested in that. So maybe that we can put that on the list of things to come in the future.
Absolutely, Dennis.
Okay. Thank you for your time and for that very interesting discussion of this area of probiotics and how it influences the life of pets.